5 championships, 2 league MVPs, 3 finals MVPs, 15 All-Star selections, 15 All-NBA selections, 15 All-Defensive selections. And every single one of those accolades earned wearing the same jersey, in the same city, for the same franchise, across 19 seasons. No other player in the history of professional basketball can match that combination of individual dominance and organizational loyalty. Not one. Tim Duncan recorded over 26,000 career points, more than 15,000 rebounds, and over 3,000 blocks. He sits in the top 10 all-time in win, shares a stat that measures total contribution to victories ahead of Larry Bird, ahead of Hakeem Olajuwon, ahead of Shaquille O'Neal. His playoff resume is even more absurd. Over 250 postseason games, Duncan averaged more than 20 points and nearly 11 rebounds per contest. Only 4 players in history have more playoff wins. He is the only player ever to be named to both an All-NBA and an All-Defensive team in each of his first 13 seasons. Think about that. For over a decade, he was simultaneously one of the 5 best offensive players and one of the 5 best defensive players on the planet, and he made it look like he was barely trying. Here is the stat that should stop you cold. The San Antonio Spurs won at least 50 games in every single healthy season of Tim Duncan's career. Every single one. No other franchise can claim that kind of sustained excellence tied to one player. Not the Bulls with Jordan. Not the Lakers with Kobe. Not the Celtics with Bird. Duncan's Spurs were the most consistently dominant team of their generation, and they did it without a single losing season during his tenure. You might think you know how good Tim Duncan was. You probably think he was boring, mechanical, predictable, just a guy who banked the ball off the glass and played solid defense. You don't know the half of it. So how good was the big fundamental actually? And is he really the greatest power forward, maybe the greatest player to ever lace up a pair of sneakers? Timothy Theodore Duncan was not supposed to be a basketball player. He was supposed to be an Olympic swimmer. Born on April 25, 1976, on the island of St. Croix in the United States Virgin Islands, Duncan grew up in the water. His older sister Tricia was a competitive swimmer who represented the Virgin Islands in the 1988 Olympics, and young Tim was following the same path. By the age of 13, he was one of the most promising freestyle swimmers in the Caribbean, training daily with serious aspirations of Olympic competition. Then, Hurricane Hugo arrived. In September of 1989, the Category 5 storm tore through the Virgin Islands and destroyed the only Olympic-sized swimming pool on St. Croix. Duncan was 13 years old. His training facility was gone. The ocean was technically available, but Duncan had a deep fear of sharks, a phobia that made open water training unbearable. Just like that, swimming was over, and basketball, almost by accident, became the replacement. Duncan did not pick up a basketball seriously until he was 14. In a sport where most future superstars have been dribbling since they could walk, he was a pure beginner as a teenager, but nature had given him gifts that no amount of early training could replicate. By his junior year of high school, Duncan had shot up to 6 feet 10 inches, with long arms, enormous hands, and a frame that was still filling out. He moved with a coordination that big men almost never possess, fluid, balanced, controlled. His footwork, even raw and untrained, had a natural precision that coaches noticed immediately. His mother, Ione, was the emotional center of the family, a woman who instilled discipline and humility in all her children. She had a saying that Duncan carried with him for the rest of his life: good, better, best. Never let it rest. Until your good is better and your better is best. Those words would become the quiet engine behind everything Duncan achieved. But tragedy struck before he ever had a chance to show the world what he could do. The day before Duncan turned 14, Ione Duncan died of breast cancer. The loss was devastating. Duncan internalized the grief, carrying it silently the way he would carry almost everything in his life, without noise, without spectacle, but with an intensity that ran deeper than anyone on the outside could see. Basketball became an outlet, and the raw material was extraordinary. Duncan was growing into one of the most physically gifted big men anyone on the island had ever seen, and word began to spread to coaches on the mainland. By the time he was 17, college recruiters were flying to St. Croix to watch a kid who had only been playing organized basketball for 3 years. What they saw defied logic. This was not a project. This was a prodigy who just happened to start late. Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, was not a basketball powerhouse. It was a small, academically rigorous school in the Atlantic Coast Conference, known more for its business program than its jump shots. Duncan chose it precisely for that reason. He wanted to get his degree. He wanted to play in a program where he could develop without the circus, and he wanted to keep a promise to his dying mother that he would graduate from college. Under head coach Dave Odom, Duncan began his transformation. As a freshman, he was already the best player on the team, averaging nearly 10 points, close to 10 rebounds, and 4 blocks per game. The blocks were the giveaway. Duncan had an instinct for shot blocking that could not be taught: timing, positioning, anticipation. He did not swat the ball into the fifth row for the highlight reel. He kept it in play, directed it to a teammate, turned defense into offense. It was the first sign of the basketball intelligence that would define his entire career. By his sophomore year, Duncan was averaging over 20 points and nearly 15 rebounds. The ACC, one of the toughest conferences in the country, had no answer for him. He won ACC Player of the Year as a sophomore and again as a junior. NBA scouts were salivating. After his junior season, every mock draft had him as the number 1 overall pick. The money, the fame, the professional career, it was all sitting there waiting for him. All he had to do was declare. He stayed. Duncan announced he was returning for his senior year at Wake Forest, honoring the promise he made to his mother. The NBA would wait, his degree would not. In a sport where early departures had become the norm, where millions of dollars were left on the table every year by players who could not resist the pull, Duncan's decision was almost shocking in its simplicity. He wanted to graduate, so he did. His senior season was a masterclass. Nearly 21 points, 15 rebounds, and 4 blocks per game. He won National Defensive Player of the Year and was a consensus first-team All-American. He carried Wake Forest to the ACC Tournament Championship and a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. The Demon Deacons lost in the second round to Stanford, a bitter ending that Duncan took hard. But by then, the basketball world already knew what was coming. Dave Odom said it plainly. Tim Duncan is the most fundamentally sound player I have ever coached, and I don't think it's particularly close. The only question left was which franchise would be lucky enough to draft him. The 1997 NBA draft was supposed to be Tim Duncan's coronation. The San Antonio Spurs, after enduring a disastrous season in which David Robinson missed most of the year with a back injury, held the number 1 overall pick. There was no debate, no drama, no last-minute trade rumors. The Spurs selected Duncan, and the basketball universe nodded. It was the most obvious number 1 pick in a generation. What happened next was something nobody predicted. Duncan did not just contribute as a rookie. He dominated, immediately. From his very first professional game, Duncan played with the poise and decision-making of a 10-year veteran. He averaged 21.1 points, 11.9 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks per game in his rookie season. Those are not rookie numbers. Those are franchise player numbers. Those are first-ballot Hall of Fame numbers, and he put them up at 21 years old, in a league filled with grown men who had been doing this for a decade. The pairing with Robinson was transformative. The Twin Towers Duncan at power forward, Robinson at center gave San Antonio the most formidable front court in basketball. Robinson, already a 2-time MVP and one of the greatest centers of his era, recognized immediately what he was playing alongside. He makes everything easier, Robinson said during that first season. I've never played with anyone who sees the game the way he does. Coming from the Admiral, a man who had seen everything the NBA had to offer, that was not a casual compliment. That was a declaration. Duncan won Rookie of the Year unanimously. He was named First-Team All-NBA and First-Team All-Defensive. He finished 5th in MVP voting. No rookie power forward had made that kind of impact since nobody. The comparison points did not exist. Karl Malone had needed years to develop. Charles Barkley had needed years to refine his game. Kevin Garnett was electric but inconsistent in his early seasons. Duncan arrived fully formed, a player who seemed to have skipped the learning curve entirely. But there was a wall. The 1998 playoffs exposed it. Duncan and the Spurs ran into the Utah Jazz, Karl Malone, John Stockton, Jerry Sloan's perfectly orchestrated machine, and lost in 5 games. Malone was physical, relentless, and experienced in ways that Duncan simply was not yet. The young star averaged 22 points in the series, but the Jazz controlled the tempo, dictated the physicality, and sent San Antonio home with a lesson. The media was kind. Nobody expects a rookie to win a championship, but Duncan was not interested in moral victories. He had tasted the playoffs. He had tasted losing, and he hated it with an intensity that the quiet exterior completely concealed. The other problem was perception. Duncan was not flashy. He did not windmill dunk. He did not talk trash. He did not have a signature shoe with a swoosh and a marketing campaign. In an era of Allen Iverson's crossover, Kobe Bryant's fadeaway, and Vince Carter's aerial acrobatics, Duncan was playing the most beautiful, efficient, fundamentally perfect basketball anyone had ever seen, and almost nobody outside of San Antonio cared. The bank shot off the glass was not sexy. The help side rotation was not going to make the highlight reel. The perfectly timed bounce pass out of a double team was invisible to casual fans. Duncan was dominant and anonymous, at the same time a paradox that would follow him for his entire career. The wall came down faster than anyone expected. In the lockout-shortened 1999 season, just 50 games of regular season basketball, Duncan and Robinson found their rhythm. But the real evolution was not physical, it was mental. Duncan, now in his second year, stopped deferring in critical moments. Robinson, sensing the shift, began consciously stepping back, ceding the alpha role to his younger teammate. It was one of the most graceful power transitions in sports history. No ego, no conflict, no passive-aggressive media quotes. Robinson simply recognized that the future was here and made room for it. Head coach Greg Popovich was the architect of everything else. Pop, a former Air Force intelligence officer with the personality of a drill sergeant who had read too much philosophy, built the Spurs culture around a simple idea. The team is everything. The individual is nothing. In any other city, with any other star, this might have caused friction. With Duncan, it was a perfect marriage. Here was a superstar who genuinely did not care about his stats, his highlights, or his brand. He cared about winning. Popovich recognized this and built an entire system around Duncan's strengths: post-up scoring, help-side defense, ball movement, and an almost obsessive commitment to doing things the right way rather than the spectacular way. The supporting cast began to crystallize. Sean Elliott provided perimeter shooting and toughness. Avery Johnson ran the point with fearless aggression. Mario Elie and Steve Kerr. Yes, that Steve Kerr brought championship experience and shooting off the bench. And the defense, anchored by Duncan and Robinson, was suffocating. San Antonio held opponents to under 90 points per game in the postseason, a number that seemed almost impossible in the modern NBA. But the real evolution was Duncan's postgame. Over the course of his first 2 seasons, he had refined the bank shot into something approaching art. The angle, the touch, the ability to score from either block with either hand, it was mechanical perfection. Hakeem Olajuwon, the greatest post scorer in NBA history, called Duncan's footwork the best I've ever seen from a power forward. When Hakeem Olajuwon tells you your footwork is special, you are not merely good, you are operating on a plane that the rest of the sport cannot reach. The 1999 playoffs were Duncan's announcement. He carved through the Timberwolves, dismantled the Lakers, sweeping Shaquille O'Neal and a young Kobe Bryant in 4 games, and then bulldozed through the Trailblazers to reach the finals. The opponent waiting in New York was a tough, physical, defensive-minded Knicks team that had scraped its way to the finals as the 8th seed. It was supposed to be a compelling underdog story. Duncan turned it into a coronation. The 1999 NBA Finals was Tim Duncan's coming-out party, and he treated it like a final exam he had already studied for. In 5 games, Duncan averaged 27.4 points, 14 rebounds, and 2.2 blocks. He was everywhere, scoring in the post, crashing the offensive glass, blocking shots at the rim, and making pinpoint passes out of double teams. The Knicks had no answer. Patrick Ewing was hobbled and aging. Larry Johnson and Allen Houston fought valiantly, but the frontcourt matchup was a mismatch of historic proportions. Duncan was 23 years old, and he was the best player on the floor by a margin that was almost uncomfortable to watch. The clinching game was pure Duncan. He posted 21 points and 14 rebounds in a dominant wire-to-wire victory. And when the buzzer sounded, he did not scream, did not rip his jersey, did not beat his chest. He hugged David Robinson. He smiled. He accepted the Finals MVP trophy with the same expression he wore when running pick-and-roll drills in practice. The restraint was not an act, it was the man. This is who Tim Duncan was. He had just won a championship at 23, and the celebration looked like a Tuesday. The 2003 championship was Duncan's magnum opus, the single greatest individual postseason run by a power forward in NBA history. San Antonio entered the playoffs as a strong team, but not an overwhelming favorite. Robinson was now 37, a shell of his former self, playing on pride and fumes in what everyone knew would be his final season. The supporting cast, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Stephen Jackson, Bruce Bowen, was talented but young. Duncan was carrying a heavier load than ever before. He responded by becoming a god. In the Western Conference, Duncan dragged the Spurs past a dangerous Phoenix Suns team and then threw a 6-game war with the Los Angeles Lakers. Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal were still together, still terrifying, still the two most talented players on any court they stepped onto. Duncan matched them shot for shot, rebound for rebound, will for will. In Game 6, with the season on the line, he posted 37 points, 16 rebounds, and 4 blocks. The Lakers had no answer. Nobody did. The finals against the New Jersey Nets was supposed to be a formality after surviving the Western Conference gauntlet. It was not. Jason Kidd, the most brilliant point guard of his generation, pushed the Nets to the brink, and the series went to 6 games. In the decisive Game 6, Duncan turned in one of the most complete performances in finals history. 21 points, 20 rebounds, 10 assists, and 8 blocks. He came within 2 blocks of a quadruple-double in a clinching finals game. Read that sentence again. 21, 20, 10, and 8 in the game that won the championship. No player in history had ever produced a stat line that absurd on that stage. Duncan won his second finals MVP, and Robinson walked off the court with a championship farewell. When reporters asked Duncan about his performance, he said simply, "I just wanted to win for David." The man had just played one of the 5 greatest finals games ever, and his first thought was about his teammate. The 2005 championship added another layer. By now, the Spurs had fully transitioned from the Twin Towers era into the Duncan-Parker-Ginobili triumvirate. Parker, the lightning-fast French point guard, had evolved from a raw, turnover-prone youngster into one of the most lethal penetrators in the league. Ginobili, the Argentine wildcard with the Euro step and the reckless genius, brought an unpredictability that perfectly complemented Duncan's methodical precision. Together, they formed the greatest international trio in NBA history. The finals opponent was the Detroit Pistons, the defending champions, the team that had dismantled the Lakers and their Shaq-Kobe juggernaut just 1 year earlier. Detroit's defense was legendary. Ben Wallace, Rasheed Wallace, Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamilton, Tayshaun Prince. This was not a team you could simply outscore. You had to grind them down, match their toughness, and outlast their will. The series went 7 games, brutal, physical, defensive, ugly, in all the ways that basketball purists adore and casual fans despise. Duncan struggled at times. His shooting percentages dipped. The Pistons' front-court physicality bothered him more than any opponent had in years. But in Game 7, on the road in Detroit, with the championship hanging by a thread, Duncan found another gear. He scored 25 points, grabbed 11 rebounds, and willed the Spurs to an 81-74 victory, his 3rd Finals MVP trophy, his 3rd ring in 7 seasons. And still, the celebration looked like a man who had just finished mowing his lawn. 2007 brought a different kind of dominance. The Spurs swept LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers in 4 games, holding the 22-year-old phenom to an abysmal shooting performance throughout the series. Duncan was no longer the athletic freak he had been in his 20s. He was 31 now, relying more on positioning, timing, and basketball IQ than raw explosiveness. But the result was the same total: suffocating control. Parker won Finals MVP this time, and Duncan seemed genuinely happy about it. Most superstars would have bristled at losing the spotlight. Duncan embraced it. The team was winning. That was all that mattered. 7 years passed between Duncan's 4th championship and his 5th. 7 years of close calls, heartbreaking losses, and a narrative that the Spurs' window had closed. In 2013, San Antonio was 28 seconds away from winning the title against LeBron James and the Miami Heat. 28 seconds. They were up 5 points in Game 6. The champagne was ready. The celebration was loading. And then, Ray Allen hit the most devastating three-pointer in NBA history, sending the game to overtime. The Heat won Game 6, and then Game 7, and Duncan was left standing at midcourt, towel over his head, staring at the floor. He was 37 years old, and many believed that was his last chance. They were wrong. The 2014 Spurs came back the following season and delivered one of the most beautiful offensive performances in NBA Finals history. They dismantled the Heat, the same LeBron, the same Dwyane Wade, and Chris Bosh in 5 games, and the basketball was breathtaking. Ball movement, cutting, spacing, unselfish play executed at a level that made professional basketball look like choreography. The Spurs' offense in that series was not just dominant, it was art. Duncan, now 38, was no longer the leading scorer. He averaged 15 points and 10 rebounds, doing the dirty work, while Kawhi Leonard emerged as the new star and claimed Finals MVP. Duncan's fingerprints were on everything, every screen, every rotation, every perfectly timed help, but the box score would not tell you that. It never did. 5 championships, 19 seasons, 1 franchise, 0 drama. In an era of super teams, player empowerment, and stars hopping from city to city chasing rings, Tim Duncan stayed in San Antonio and built a dynasty the old-fashioned way, brick by brick, bank shot by bank shot. The loss of his mother before he ever touched a basketball defined Duncan in ways that the public rarely saw. I own Duncan's death from breast cancer when Tim was just a teenager, left a wound that never fully healed. Duncan spoke about it rarely, but when he did, the words carried a weight that made everyone in the room go quiet. "She was everything to me," he said once in a rare interview. "Everything I've done, every game I've played, I carry her with me. She told me to never settle for less than my best. I never have." But there was another chapter of pain that almost nobody talks about. In 2013, during the most agonizing loss of his career, those 28 seconds against the Heat, Duncan missed a close-range shot in the final moments of regulation that could have sealed the championship. He banged the floor with both hands. It was, in 19 years, the single most emotional public reaction anyone had ever seen from Tim Duncan. The man who never showed anything, who never trash-talked, never celebrated, never complained, was on his hands and knees on the hardwood, and for one raw, unguarded second, you could see every ounce of competitive fire that he had spent 2 decades hiding behind that blank expression. Off the court, Duncan endured a painful and very public divorce from his first wife Amy in 2013. Financial disputes, allegations of mismanagement by a financial advisor who defrauded him of millions, and the emotional toll of a family breaking apart, all of it happening while he was still performing at an elite level on the court. Duncan never addressed it publicly. He never used it as an excuse. He showed up, played his minutes, grabbed his rebounds, set his screens, and went home. The silence was not coldness, it was armor. And through all of it, the loss of his mother, the heartbreak of 2013, the personal turmoil, Duncan kept playing. He kept showing up. He kept being the most reliable, most consistent, most fundamentally sound player in the world. Not because the cameras were watching, but because that was the only way he knew how to exist. Father Time came for Duncan the way it comes for every athlete, slowly at first, then all at once. By the 2015 and 2016 seasons, Duncan was no longer starting most games. His minutes were managed carefully by Popovich, who treated his aging superstar like a vintage car only taken out for special occasions, but still capable of extraordinary things when called upon. Even diminished, Duncan was still effective. At 39 years old, he was still a plus defender, still a smart passer, still capable of dropping 15 points and 10 rebounds on any given night when the moment demanded it. His per-minute production remained elite even as the minutes themselves shrank. Like a Ferrari losing 100 horsepower, still faster than anything else on the road. His final season, 2015-16, ended in the second round of the playoffs against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook were simply too fast, too explosive, too young. Duncan played his last game on May 12, 2016, scoring as many points as he grabbed rebounds both in single digits and fouled out in the fourth quarter. It was not the Hollywood ending. There was no farewell tour, no tearful press conference at center court, no league-wide victory lap. Duncan retired the way he played, quietly, without fanfare, releasing a statement through the team. Greg Popovich, who is not known for sentimentality, was asked what Duncan meant to the franchise. His answer was devastatingly simple. He's the most selfless superstar I've ever been around. He's made every person in this organization better, and I include myself in that. Think about the arc of this story. A kid from the Virgin Islands who was supposed to be a swimmer, a hurricane that destroyed a pool, a mother who died too soon but left behind a code that her son would follow for the rest of his life, a late start in basketball, a quiet college career at a school that nobody confused for a basketball factory, a promise kept, a degree earned, and then 19 years of the most dominant, most consistent, most fundamentally brilliant basketball the sport has ever seen. Tim Duncan was the best player in the NBA for roughly a decade. From 1999 to 2007, there was no one you would have picked over him to start a franchise. Not Shaq, who was more dominant but less durable and less versatile. Not Kobe, who was more spectacular but less efficient and less willing to sacrifice ego. Not Kevin Garnett, who was more athletic but never had the postseason success until he left Minnesota. Duncan was the complete package: offense, defense, leadership, longevity, and an almost supernatural ability to elevate every player around him. The consistency is what stuns you when you step back and look at the full picture. 19 seasons, 5 championships, 0 losing seasons. A winning percentage that ranks among the highest in league history for any player. He never demanded a trade. He never held out for a bigger contract. He reportedly took less money on multiple occasions to give the Spurs salary cap flexibility to sign better supporting players. In 2001, he turned down a massive offer from the Orlando Magic to stay in San Antonio. The decision cost him tens of millions of dollars. He did not care. Only a handful of players in any sport have sustained that level of excellence for that long. Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Michael Jordan, LeBron James. That is the company Tim Duncan keeps, whether the casual fan realizes it or not. And unlike most of those names, Duncan did it without ever being the loudest voice in the room. He did it by being the steadiest hand, the surest foundation, the bedrock on which everything else was built. The greatest power forward of all time. That is the question. And there are really only 4 candidates worth discussing: Tim Duncan, Karl Malone, Kevin Garnett, and Dirk Nowitzki. Each one was extraordinary. Each one changed the position. And each one falls short of Duncan in ways that matter. Karl Malone was a physical marvel. The mailman delivered for 20 seasons and retired as the second leading scorer in NBA history. His durability was legendary, his toughness beyond question. But Malone never won a championship. 2 finals appearances, 2 losses, both to Michael Jordan's Bulls. In the moments that defined legacies, Malone came up short. Duncan has 5 rings to Malone's 0, and in head-to-head playoff matchups, Duncan owned him. Kevin Garnett was the most versatile big man of his generation, a 6'12" defensive savant who could guard every position, handle the ball, and shoot from the perimeter. His intensity was volcanic, his passion visible on every play. Garnett won 1 championship in 21 seasons, and it required leaving Minnesota and joining a super team in Boston with Paul Pierce and Ray Allen. Duncan won 5 championships with 1 franchise. The gap in postseason achievement is enormous, and no amount of regular season brilliance can close it. Dirk Nowitzki revolutionized the power forward position with his 7-foot shooting stroke and his legendary 2011 championship run, one of the greatest individual playoff performances in history. That title, earned by toppling LeBron, Wade, and Bosh in Miami, is Dirk's masterpiece. But one masterpiece, no matter how brilliant, does not match Duncan's 5-act opus. Dirk changed the game. Duncan conquered it. And here is the argument that separates Duncan from everyone else at his position. He was the greatest defensive power forward in history, and one of the greatest offensive power forwards in history, simultaneously, for over a decade. No one else combined both sides of the ball at that level for that long. Malone was a limited defender. Garnett's offensive game, while versatile, never produced Duncan's postseason scoring numbers. Dirk was a defensive liability for most of his career. Duncan did everything: offense, defense, rebounding, passing, leadership, winning, and he did it all without ever needing to tell you about it. The greatest power forward of all time is Tim Duncan. It is not particularly close. A hurricane took away his swimming pool. A promise to his mother kept him in college. A bank shot off the glass, built an empire. Tim Duncan did not play basketball the way you wanted him to. He played it the way it was supposed to be played, with precision, with patience, with a selflessness so total that you could watch an entire game and not realize the best player on the floor had just recorded a quiet 20-12. He was the big fundamental, and fundamentals, it turns out, are anything but boring when they are executed at the highest level a human being has ever reached. If you want to see another legend who built a dynasty through pure will and tactical genius, check out our video on Greg Popovich and the system that made all of this possible. That story starts where this one ends, and trust me, it is just as good.